Let's get these carburetors put back together and get them on the bike. Welcome to Urban Monk TV. So it was back in episode 61, 62-ish, 63, somewhere in there, that I cleaned these carburetors and discussed what I was going to do with the fuel rails, which I've decided to keep. And I decided not to separate the carbs because of those fuel rails, because the seals were good on them. So time to put these things back together. I also did some discussion around which main jet size I'm going to go with to start. I'll put a link below to that video, but I think I've landed on a 92. Stock is an 80, so we're going to throw 92s in here for the main jets. All other jets I'm going to keep stock at this point, and let's put them back together. The first thing I want to put in is the air screws. Got this O-ring kit for these carbs, and these air screws, which number is this? This is number 3. I want to find number 1. There we go. There's all my parts for 1. And just to be clear, this is the engine side, so you got 1, 2, 3, and 4. Maybe I should go through all of these parts. Okay, so let me run through all of the parts for One Carb. Kind of the big one, the easy one, the float pin. This is the float needle or needle valve. This is the seat for that valve, or this sometimes is called the valve itself. And you want to make sure it's clean down in here and well polished. You can polish that with like any kind of a metal polish, or frankly you can use a Q-tip and like some toothpaste or something. Just get it cleaned out of there real good. This is the air screw and its spring, and then you've got the main, well, I'll call it the valve, I guess. This is main jet valve, and your needle goes down into it from the slide, and then at the bottom of that is your main jet. This is the one we're going to be changing to a 92. Stock is an 80. And then you have your secondary jet. I'm leaving these stock. I forget what number that is. It's so small, I'm sorry, I can't even read the thing. 60? 61? No, 50. I'm sorry. It's a 50. 50. You have the float bowl screw, essentially. And then just the screws for holding the float bowl on, and the top screws for over the slides. These are all the O-rings for the entire set of 4, so don't worry about that. So pretty basic parts. There's not a lot in there. Oh, this flat washer is for the float needle valve. So we're going to put in the air screws, inspect these to make sure that this is smooth, that there isn't some kind of an indentation to this taper. And if you need to clean these, you can polish them with just like a... Guys in the old days used to take the cover of a matchbook and just rotate, and the abrasiveness of the cardboard in a matchbook was enough. Doesn't take much to clean these. Maybe just a little Scotch-Brite, and we're going to go ahead and install that into here. Oh, sorry. Don't forget the spring like I was about to do. once I get the thread started, what we're going to do is gently thread this all the way in until it stops. And what you don't want to do is crank it in there, or you're going to put an indentation to the taper on that needle, or worse yet, you're going to break it off. So I'm using a very light touch on this screwdriver as I go in. There I'm just starting to feel it seat. And the service manual says to begin with this out 2 turns. So there's 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2. On to the next one. After the air screw, I'm just going to put in the float valve. This is where gasoline flows into the float. And that float, when the gasoline level rises, you have to recall we're upside down here. You know, as this thing begins to float, they go this way, and when they go this way, they press against this needle, which has a taper, and it closes the hole in there. Anyways, let's get this threaded on. Don't forget the washer. And then I'm going to just snug that up. It's 10 millimeter. I'm using a 3/8 inch ratchet here, but it's really overkill. Do not go cranking these too tight. Just snug it in there. That's all you need to do. And then on these needles, make sure that the spring in here is working. When you depress this plunger, let me show you this closer. When you depress that plunger, it should spring right back with no resistance whatsoever. And then this taper should be nice and polished and clean. If that has any sort of an indentation to it, even when the float is up at the right level, it's going to continue to leak fuel in there, and you're going to have a problem. So we will just gently drop that in, and then we can set our float in here. And oh, the pin goes from this side. Actually, the pin can go from any side. So that's it, and when it floats, it presses and just seals the valve. When it's not floating, the valve is open and fuel is flowing in here. So you can adjust this, we'll get to that later, but you just bend this little tab. And we will need to adjust these. So then we can just put in our main valve. Oh, new O-ring, sorry. Okay. Got a new O-ring on there. That is, what, 8 millimeter? Yeah. That's as tight as I'm going to do it. I'm like literally not even going to put a wrench on the thing. And then let's put in our secondary. In hindsight, I'm thinking it would be easier to do that before the float. None of my secondaries have any sort of a O-ring on them, so I guess these should not have an O-ring. I'm going to check the parts breakdown just to be sure. Okay, don't go cranking this stuff in too hard. It's not necessary. And then here's my main jet, but that's stock. I wanted to go up to a 92, so let me get the 92. I'm sorry, there is no 92. It goes from 90 to 95, so I'm going 95. Again, snug is all it takes. Might as well leave that screwdriver out. So I'm done with this one. Let me go through the other three and just get all of the rest of the parts in, and then we can start worrying about float adjustment. Actually, one more thing. I've got this float bowl screw. I'm going to put a new O-ring on it and mount that in the bowl. Pretty simple. That's number one. Just want to clear something up. I called this the air screw earlier, and it's just too early in the morning for me. This is the fuel screw, essentially. Idle fuel screw. And the air screw looks similar, but is not mounted down below here in this position. It's actually mounted over here. So still 2 turns, but we need to make sure that the original setting wasn't different. And I probably recorded that when I took them out. Here in my notes I even called them air screws too. That's just me being thick-headed. They are fuel screws. They don't regulate air. And it looks like they were 2.5. Number 3 was 2 3/4 turns. I'm probably just going to set them all to 2.5. So I've got this one at 2 right now. I'm going to back it out 1 more half. Okay, new O-ring, number 2 fuel screw. And snug 1, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. There's the number 2 float bowl plug. New O-ring on that. I'm going to set that aside for now. Go ahead and put in this secondary jet. A lot easier before the float. And let's put in our valve seat that has the washer on it. Oh, just make sure we're clean. Yeah, it's clean. $10mm. Not too tight. New O-ring on the needle jet. 8mm. New 95 main jet. Needle, float, and the hinge pin to hold it all together. Number 2 is done. Continue on down the line. Hold the phone. Did anybody catch this? I didn't. Taking this fuel screw back out. No spring. This is a habit that I guess I was utilizing here, where I put all of the small parts on a white piece of paper, and so they stand out to me, and I kept all the parts together for each carb, and lo and behold, I just noticed, why is that spring still sitting there? So kind of a good practice, not to pat myself on the back for about making an error, but now we got a spring. The other guy I forgot to mention, here's one guy I overlooked. This is the bleeder jet, I guess I'll call it. It is a jet, and this one's just got a little crusty stuff on it, but it's clean. The holes are clear, and these live down in here. They live in here underneath your secondary jet, so make sure that those get cleaned and reinstalled carefully deep down in here. They're here and here, here and here. I just installed this one, so, and then this jet goes over the top of it, that 50 that I mentioned earlier. The other thing I'll mention about the bleeders is there is no O-ring on those. Here's a good example of the kind of thing that is going to drive you crazy if you don't catch it. There's supposed to be 4, 2 on each quadrant of this thing, free and clear, and here one is completely plugged. So I'm going to get that cleaned out, but that kind of thing can affect your performance, and you can be wondering what is wrong here and be chasing that for a long time. So make sure you get all these parts clean and all those holes clear without enlarging them. When I'm looking like that. So the bleeder and the secondary jet are in here. I need my needle jet. Not to be a broken record, but new O-ring. Then my main jet. Went with a 95. Might find out later that's not what we want to be doing, but we got to start somewhere. Fuel screw. Oop, spring. Almost did it again. Spring on the fuel screw. Then you go in. Also found I miscounted this one, so I went back and got it to 2.5 turns out. But right now we're just going in. Okay, so there it's seated, and 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. and float valve. Oops. Just gently snug. How did I overlook you? Oops. Needle, spring is good, taper is nice, back in there. Float, these little slots go top side. This little tab goes up toward you. There, we're done. I can put the bowls on. Correction, I cannot put the bowls on yet. We need to adjust the float height here. Now, to measure these, you got to have a caliper, and I'm zeroed out. The height from here to inside here without the gasket, and your first thing you're going to say is, Urban Monk, you got the gasket in there. Yes, I do. This one's in really good shape. In fact, all of these are, and they're stuck in there really well. I'm going to leave them. I've measured the thickness of the gasket. It's literally 1 millimeter. So I just need to subtract 1 millimeter from the measurement. But the float bowl from here, from here to inside here should be 24 millimeter. I'm going to measure 23 because I got the gasket in. It's 24 millimeter without the gasket. That's measuring 25. Yeah. So, in order for that to be a little bit lower, this tab needs to be bent up just slightly. And I can do that simply by just a little bit of a bend on it. Not quite. There's 24. I gotta go to 23. Three and a half. Getting close. You just play with it a little bit. Doesn't take much. That should be good. And I'm going to do that to all four, obviously. So without gasket, 24 millimeter. I got the gasket in, so I'm going 23 millimeter. Now with the float height set, I can start putting my bowls on. This hole is meant to accommodate the fuel screw, and you want to make sure that you've got the right bowls on the right carbs so that your drain plug is facing toward the outside of the bike. So you've got two that face this way and two that face that way. And then these are JIS screws, so let me get my JIS screwdriver. washer on each of these screws, by the way. These screws can be replaced with Allen hex, if you like, or socket cap. And to clean up these screws, you could run them on the wire wheel, or I'm just simply, because they're so small, I am just simply running them on a piece of Scotch-Brite here on my bench top. Cleans them up nice, just cleans up the head. I don't think too many people are going to be looking very closely at those, but while I'm here, may as well. You don't need to put any sort of gasket material on here as far as like a sealer. If for some reason you did, make sure that it is fuel resistant, and not many of them are. Your typical Permatex black or blue or any of those are not fuel resistant. Permatex does make a fuel resistant sealer. I've used it in the past, it works great, but you just got to make sure you get the right one. But it shouldn't be necessary. Drain plugs out, drain plugs out. Okay, we got float poles. It's almost a little silly to be putting these on right now because I have to do a carb sync and I'm going to need to get at these adjustment screws. So now that I think about it, I'm not going to put these on, but clearly it's 3 simple screws, that's it. But I'm going to take this off because we've got a lot of adjustment to do later, and why take it off then? So in preparation for mounting the carbs, I put the clamps onto the intake boots, and do yourself a favor with this inside one and angle it down a little bit, because when things get busy in here and cluttered, you'll be happy that you did and not have it like this where you can't quite match up with it. So just a little angle gives you a good attack on the thing. Something to think about. Grab some dish soap and a little bowl here from the kitchen. Gotta get these slippery. Get this out of here before I damage it. This way I can kind of use my butt to hold the bike in place, because I'm pushing so hard I want to slide the whole thing forward. There. That's the trick. Alright. Yeah, now I'm very happy I angled that clamp in there. Some bikes, you want to connect your throttle cables before putting the carbs in place. Don't recall that this one is too difficult to do with the carbs mounted. So before I mount my pod filters, these are those uni foam, and they need an oil put into the foam There is some oil already here, obviously from the factory, because I can feel it in my fingers and see it on the inside. But I'd like to make sure I've got more in there, and they're not that oily. I'm guessing you could use just about any light, thin oil, like, you know, a 10 weight or something. But let me do some research on that to be sure before I commit to that. And then mounting these cables, I don't quite remember how a guy goes about doing this. Well, there it is. So that's the front cable. Before I get things too snug there, I'm just going to get this guy in. Looks like he comes from the back and then up like that. There we go. So, starting to get some throttle control. I got a lot of adjustment to do there yet. So let me get that figured out, because this control on the front, the throttle control, is not tight yet on the handlebar, but I can get rid of my markings, front and rear cable. And then one more consideration before we're done here and ready to, you know, start throwing fuel at these things, which I won't be doing for a little while. But we've got this port and this one back here. There you go. Those two need to have hoses run from them that just come up. They used to just sit on top of the air box in here. And so I've got to come up with something similar where, you know, something, just two tubes comes out, and it's for atmospheric pressure, I believe. At least that was the theory of one gentleman who weighed in here on a previous episode. So that's something that I need to figure out also. So that's it. That's putting the carbs together and mounting them. Again, I'm going to hold off on putting the pod filters on. Not rocket surgery there, obviously, but I just want to do some research on what oil to put in those foam filters before I put them on. Hey, if you guys like what I'm doing, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to become a monk, subscribe. If you have comments and questions about what I've done here, feel free to leave them below. I love to interact with you guys. Thanks for watching.